The divorce papers sat on the mahogany table between them, crisp and final, while Rebecca's manicured nails drummed against the wood with barely contained glee. Across from her, Daniel stared at the documents with hollow eyes, his thrift store suit hanging loose on his frame. The same poor husband she'd grown to despise over their 7 suffocating years of marriage. What Rebecca didn't know, what she couldn't possibly fathom as she exchanged triumphant glances with her lover Brandon seated smugly beside her, was that 72 hours ago, a certified letter had arrived at their modest apartment. A letter Daniel had hidden in his coat pocket, a letter that announced he'd just inherited a $90 billion empire from the reclusive uncle he'd mentioned only twice in their entire marriage. The cheating wife laughed while signing the divorce papers, her signature flowing with theatrical flourish as she imagined her new life of luxury with Brandon, the successful investment banker who'd been worth everything Daniel wasn't. But when the judge adjusted his glasses and began reading the mandatory financial disclosure, a routine formality Rebecca had insisted upon to ensure she'd get her fair share of Daniel's nothing, his voice faltered mid-sentence, and the courtroom fell into a silence so profound that Rebecca's laughter died in her throat like a strangled bird. The numbers the judge read aloud seemed impossible, absurd, a mistake that would surely be corrected. Until the judge read his net worth. $90 billion, $200 million, $473,000. And Rebecca's face drained of color so completely, she looked like a ghost watching her own funeral. What Daniel did next, with a calmness that bordered on supernatural, would crush her forever in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. But how had a man she'd dismissed as worthless, a husband she'd betrayed in their own bed, come to possess wealth that rivaled nations? What secrets had Daniel kept locked behind his quiet, defeated demeanor? And why, when Brandon's face turned from smug to horrified, did Rebecca suddenly remember the strange phone call Daniel had received 3 nights ago? The one that made him smile for the first time in months? The fluorescent lights of courtroom 7B hummed with an electrical persistence that matched the tension crackling through the air. Rebecca Morrison sat with her spine straight, her designer dress, purchased with Brandon's credit card just yesterday, clinging to her curves in a way that announced victory before the battle had even concluded. 3 years ago, she'd stopped caring about Daniel's feelings. 2 years ago, she'd started the affair. 6 months ago, she demanded the divorce, and today, finally, she would be free. Daniel occupied the chair across from her, like a man who'd forgotten how to take up space. His fingers, calloused from the warehouse job he'd worked for the past 8 years, rested limply on his lap. The suit he wore, the only suit he owned, had been purchased from a Goodwill store for his father's funeral 5 years prior. Rebecca remembered that funeral, remembered how embarrassed she'd been introducing her friends to her husband. This man who couldn't even afford proper mourning attire. Brandon, seated directly behind Rebecca in the gallery, radiated the kind of confidence that came with a 6-figure salary and a penthouse view of the city. His hand had been on Rebecca's lower back when they had entered the courthouse, a possessive gesture that Daniel had witnessed without comment. Brandon's Rolex caught the light as he checked the time, eager to finalize this formality and begin his new life with Rebecca. A life that would include the European vacation they'd already booked, the joint checking account they'd already opened, the future they'd already mapped out in excruciating detail. What none of them knew was that in Daniel's coat pocket, folded into a small square, was a letter that had arrived exactly 79 hours ago. The envelope had been heavy, cream-colored, with an embossed logo Daniel had only seen once before in his life. 23 years ago, when he was 11 years old, visiting his mother's estranged brother for the first and only time. Uncle Elijah Morrison had been a myth in Daniel's family, a cautionary tale about brilliance and isolation. Daniel's mother had spoken of her brother perhaps twice a year, always with a mixture of regret and resentment. Elijah had left their small Illinois town at 18, with nothing but a mind for technology and a refusal to settle for ordinary. The family had lost track of him after he'd made his first million, and by the time he'd made his first billion, they'd stopped trying to reconnect. Pride, Daniel's mother had explained, worked both ways. The one visit Daniel remembered had been strange and brief. 11-year-old Daniel had accompanied his mother to San Francisco, where Uncle Elijah lived in a penthouse that seemed to float above the clouds. The man had been kind but distant, brilliant but lonely. He'd shown Daniel his computer systems, his investment algorithms, his vision for technology that wouldn't exist for another decade. And he'd said something Daniel had never forgotten. Most people mistake poverty for stupidity, Danny. They'll underestimate you your whole life. Let them. A man who's underestimated holds all the cards. That had been their only conversation. Uncle Elijah had died of a heart attack 3 days ago in his Silicon Valley estate, alone except for his lawyers and his legacy. The letter had been delivered by courier, marked urgent, time-sensitive, personal. Daniel hadn't told Rebecca about the letter because by the time it arrived, she'd already moved half her belongings into Brandon's penthouse. She'd already scheduled his court date. She'd already made it clear that their marriage was a mistake she was eager to correct. So Daniel had read the letter alone in the apartment they'd shared, surrounded by the gaps where her things had been, and he'd made a decision. He would say nothing. He would let her proceed exactly as planned, and he would discover finally what kind of woman he'd actually married. Judge Patricia Hendricks entered the courtroom with the weary efficiency of someone who'd presided over 300 divorce proceedings and found each one as depressing as the last. She was 62, sharp-eyed, and had long ago lost patience for dramatic courtroom revelations. Today was supposed to be simple, a straightforward dissolution of marriage with minimal assets to divide. The preliminary paperwork had indicated that Daniel Morrison worked at a warehouse making $32,000 annually, that Rebecca Morrison was a part-time yoga instructor making $28,000 annually, and that they owned nothing of significant value. "Let's make this quick," Judge Hendricks said, settling into her chair. "I have 4 more cases this afternoon." Rebecca's lawyer, a sharp-suited woman named Victoria Chen, who specialized in extracting maximum value from minimum marriages, stood with practiced grace. "Your Honor, my client seeks a clean dissolution with a fair division of any and all marital assets, including any potential inheritances or windfalls that may have occurred during the marriage." It was a standard clause one Victoria included in every divorce filing. It protected her clients from last-minute revelations, from hidden accounts, from any financial surprises that might surface. Rebecca had insisted on its inclusion, not because she expected Daniel to have hidden anything, the man could barely afford groceries, but because it felt satisfying to leave no stone unturned. It felt like winning. Daniel's court-appointed lawyer, a tired public defender named Martin Ross, who'd met his client for the first time 15 minutes ago, nodded vaguely. He'd skimmed the case file, seen the numbers, and assumed this would be over in 20 minutes. His client had said almost nothing during their brief consultation, had simply agreed to everything with the quiet resignation of a man who'd already lost what mattered. "Mr. Morrison," Judge Hendricks said, "do you contest any aspect of this divorce petition?" Daniel's voice when he spoke was so soft that the court reporter had to lean forward. "No, Your Honor." Rebecca exhaled with theatrical relief, her hand flying to her chest. Brandon leaned forward in the gallery, his smile widening. This was it. This was freedom. "Very well," Judge Hendricks continued. "The court recognizes the dissolution of marriage between Rebecca Lynn Morrison and Daniel James Morrison. Now, regarding the division of assets," she paused, adjusting her reading glasses to review the financial disclosure forms. Her eyes scanned the first page, moved to the second, and then stopped. The courtroom was silent except for the humming lights. Judge Hendricks removed her glasses, cleaned them, replaced them, read again. "I'm sorry," she said slowly, "but there appears to be an error in this documentation." Rebecca's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, according to the mandatory financial disclosure submitted this morning," Judge Hendricks looked directly at Daniel, her expression shifting from bored efficiency to sharp attention. "Mr. Morrison, you're listed here as the sole beneficiary of the Elijah Morrison Trust, with assets totaling—" She paused again, as if the numbers themselves were too large to say aloud. $90,200,473,000. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Rebecca's laughter, the sound that had been building in her throat, the triumphant cackle she'd been saving for this moment, strangled itself mid-birth. Her hand, which had been reaching for Brandon's, froze in midair. Her face, which had been flushed with victory, went white as paper. "That's impossible," she whispered. Brandon's expression transformed from smug satisfaction to dawning horror in the span of 3 seconds. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. The Rolex on his wrist suddenly felt like a toy. Victoria Chen, Rebecca's lawyer, found her voice first. "Your Honor, there must be some mistake. My client was assured. The preliminary filings indicated—" "The preliminary filings were submitted before the inheritance cleared probate," Judge Hendricks interrupted. "According to the documentation here, Mr. Morrison inherited his uncle's entire estate 79 hours ago. The estate includes majority shares in 6 technology companies, a venture capital firm, real estate holdings in 14 countries, and liquid assets of approximately $47 billion. She looked at Daniel again, this time with something resembling respect. "Mr. Morrison, were you aware of this inheritance when you agreed to the divorce terms?" Every eye in the courtroom turned to Daniel. He sat perfectly still for a long moment, and then slowly he smiled. It was a small smile, sad around the edges, but it transformed his face entirely. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "I was aware." Rebecca made a sound like she'd been punched. "You knew? You knew?" Daniel turned to look at his wife, his soon-to-be ex-wife, for the first time since entering the courtroom. His eyes, which she'd grown so accustomed to seeing filled with hurt and resignation, were clear and calm. "I received the letter 3 days ago," he said quietly. "Tuesday night. You remember Tuesday night?" Rebecca's mind raced backward. Tuesday night. Tuesday night, she'd been at Brandon's penthouse, celebrating their upcoming freedom with expensive champagne. She'd come home at midnight to collect more of her things, and Daniel had been sitting in the dark living room, fully dressed, holding something she hadn't bothered to ask about. "You were there," she whispered. "You were just sitting there." "I was reading about my uncle's death," Daniel said, "and about his wish that I inherit everything he'd built. He'd been following my life, apparently, through investigators, through reports. He knew about my marriage. He knew about—" Daniel's voice caught slightly. "Everything." The words hung in the air like smoke. Brandon found his voice, though it came out strangled. "So you're telling me you're worth $90 billion? $90 billion, $200 million, $473,000, Judge Hendricks corrected. "According to the official documentation, yes." Rebecca's lawyer was frantically typing on her phone, no doubt searching for legal precedents, for loopholes, for anything that could salvage this disaster. But the clause she'd so carefully included, the one ensuring Rebecca would receive her share of any inheritances received during the marriage, had been crystal clear. Assets acquired before the final dissolution became marital property. The inheritance had cleared probate 79 hours ago. The divorce was being finalized now. By Rebecca's own insistence on that protective clause, she'd just entitled herself to half of $90 billion. Except Daniel was smiling, and that smile suggested he understood something they didn't. "Your Honor," Daniel said, addressing the judge with a calmness that seemed to fill the entire courtroom, "I'd like to present additional documentation." From his coat pocket, that same pocket where he'd kept Uncle Elijah's letter, he produced a second envelope. This one was newer, crisper, official-looking. Martin Ross, Daniel's public defender, looked as confused as everyone else. "Mr. Morrison, I wasn't informed." "I retained private counsel yesterday," Daniel explained. "This is a post-nuptial agreement, signed and notarized 8 months ago, in which Rebecca Morrison voluntarily waived all claims to any inheritances I might receive from family members." The envelope landed on Judge Hendricks' bench with a soft thump that sounded like thunder. Rebecca's mind spiraled backward 8 months, grasping for memory. 8 months ago. October. She'd been deep into her affair with Brandon by then, meeting him 3 times a week at his penthouse, spinning elaborate lies about yoga workshops and girls' nights. And Daniel had asked her to sign something. She remembered now. He'd presented her with papers one evening, explained something about protecting family assets, about his mother's wishes. She'd barely glanced at them, too distracted by a text from Brandon, too annoyed that Daniel was bothering her with paperwork when she was trying to leave. "Just a formality," Daniel had said that night, his voice soft and defeated as always. "My mother wants to ensure that if anything happens to Uncle Elijah, the estate stays in the Morrison bloodline." Rebecca had signed without reading, eager to get back to her phone, to her secret life, to everything that mattered. She remembered Daniel watching her sign, remembered thinking how pathetic he looked with his hopeful eyes and his defeated posture. Now watching Judge Hendricks examine the post-nuptial agreement, Rebecca realized she'd been played. Daniel had known 8 months ago. Somehow, impossibly, he'd known. "This appears to be properly executed," Judge Hendricks said, a note of approval in her voice. "Signed by both parties, witnessed, notarized. Mrs. Morrison, you waived all claims to family inheritances received by your husband." "I didn't know what I was signing," Rebecca shrieked, her composure finally shattering completely. "He tricked me." "The document clearly states its purpose," Judge Hendricks replied coolly. "And you signed voluntarily, unless you're claiming you were coerced?" Rebecca opened her mouth and closed it. She couldn't claim coercion. Daniel had never raised his voice to her in 7 years of marriage, had never threatened her, had never been anything but pathetically accommodating. Everyone knew that. Her friends knew that. Her mother knew that. She'd complained about it constantly, how weak he was, how spineless, how utterly lacking in masculine authority. Daniel spoke again, his voice still quiet but carrying clearly through the shocked silence. "Your Honor, I'd like to add something to the record." "Proceed," Judge Hendricks said. 8 months ago, my mother contacted me to inform me that Uncle Elijah had been diagnosed with a terminal heart condition. She suggested I prepare the post-nuptial agreement as a precaution. I presented it to my wife and explained his purpose clearly. She was... He paused, choosing words carefully. "Distracted that evening, but she had ample opportunity to read the document. I even encouraged her to have a lawyer review it. She declined." Rebecca remembered that too now, through the fog of her panic. Daniel had suggested she show it to a lawyer. She'd waved him off, annoyed, impatient to end the conversation. "But you didn't tell me he was worth $90 billion, she screamed. "You said it was just about keeping family assets in the family. You made it sound like nothing." "I said exactly what was in the document," Daniel replied, "that any and all family inheritances, regardless of size, would remain separate property. The amount wasn't specified because Uncle Elijah's wealth fluctuated significantly based on market conditions. But the principle was clear." Victoria Chen stood abruptly. "Your Honor, my client was deceived by omission. Mr. Morrison deliberately concealed the magnitude." "He concealed nothing," Judge Hendricks interrupted. "The post-nuptial agreement is comprehensive and clear. Mrs. Morrison chose not to read it carefully. That's not grounds to invalidate it." She looked at Rebecca with something between pity and contempt. "You insisted on including a clause to capture any inheritances, and in doing so, you reminded Mr. Morrison to present the very document that excludes you from them. That's almost poetic." Brandon had gone completely silent in the gallery, his face gray, his expensive suit suddenly looking cheap. He was an investment banker, skilled at reading financial situations, and he understood exactly what had just happened. He'd calculated his future with Rebecca based on splitting whatever scraps Daniel might have, maybe walking away with $50,000 after legal fees. Now he was watching $90 billion evaporate, along with the woman who no longer offered him anything but association with massive financial humiliation. The mistress, because that's what Brandon suddenly realized he was, the male version of the other woman, the fool who'd been used, stood quietly and walked toward the courtroom door. Rebecca saw him moving. "Brandon? Brandon, wait!" He didn't wait. He didn't even look back. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed through the room. Rebecca turned back to Daniel, her face contorting through emotions too rapidly to name. Shock, rage, disbelief, desperation. "Daniel, please, this is crazy. We can work this out. I made mistakes, but we can..." "No," Daniel said simply. The word landed like a hammer. 7 years, he continued, his voice still quiet but now carrying an edge of something darker. 7 years I worked 60-hour weeks at that warehouse. Every promotion I earned, every extra shift I took. You complained that it wasn't enough, that I wasn't enough. Do you remember what you said on our 5th anniversary? Rebecca's face went blank. You said you'd married the wrong Morrison. You said if you'd known Uncle Elijah existed, you'd have tried to meet him instead. You laughed when you said it. You thought it was funny. The memory surfaced for Rebecca like a body floating up from deep water. She had said that. It had been a joke, a frustrated comment after Daniel had given her a cheap bracelet he'd saved for months to afford. She'd been comparing him to the lavish gifts Brandon gave her, to the life she deserved. That's when I started keeping notes, Daniel said. That's when I started documenting everything. Your late nights, your lies, your affair with Brandon, which started 7 months before you asked for this divorce, by the way. I have text messages, Rebecca. Hotel receipts. I have a video from last month. Rebecca's knees gave out. She caught herself on the table, her manicured nails scraping wood. A video, she whispered. From Brandon's building lobby, Daniel confirmed. Time-stamped, showing you arriving at 9 p.m. and leaving at 7 a.m. Multiple dates. I paid a private investigator $3,000, money I'd saved for your birthday gift, to document your affair. I did this 6 months ago, right after you first mentioned divorce. Why? Rebecca breathed. Why go through all this? Daniel stood, buttoning his cheap suit jacket with careful precision. Because Uncle Elijah taught me something when I was 11 years old. He taught me that people reveal their true character when they think you're powerless. And I needed to know, Rebecca. I needed to know if the woman I married would stand by me when I had nothing, or if she'd only loved what she thought I might become. He walked toward the courtroom door, then paused and turned back. You failed that test, he said, so completely that you don't even understand what you've lost. It's not the money, Rebecca. You never had the money. What you've lost is the knowledge that you were ever capable of loving someone for who they were instead of what they had. The courtroom remained silent as Daniel left. His public defender scrambled to follow, still clutching papers he hadn't needed to present. Judge Hendricks watched the poor husband, the man who was no longer poor, who perhaps never had been in the ways that mattered, exit her courtroom with more dignity than most millionaires could muster. Rebecca collapsed into her chair, her designer dress suddenly feeling like a costume. Victoria Chen was already packing her briefcase, calculating how to spin this disaster into something that wouldn't destroy her reputation. Around the gallery, court watchers who'd wandered in expecting routine proceedings were frantically typing on their phones, knowing they just witnessed the story that would dominate social media for weeks. Then the courtroom door opened again. A woman entered, tall, elegant, professionally dressed, with features that suggested both Asian and Latina heritage. She walked with the confident precision of someone accustomed to high-stakes environments. Behind her, two men in expensive suits carried briefcases that screamed, "Corporate law firm." The woman approached Rebecca's table and stopped, looking down at the crying, broken figure slumped in the chair. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, her voice crisp and businesslike, "my name is Diana Vega. I represent the Morrison Family Trust and, as of this morning, Mr. Daniel Morrison personally." Rebecca looked up, her face streaked with mascara. Diana Vega smiled, a cold, professional expression that contained no warmth whatsoever. Then she did something that would haunt Rebecca's nightmares for years to come. She spat directly in Rebecca's face. The courtroom gasped. Judge Hendricks half rose from her chair. "Ms. Vega, that is completely—" "My apologies, Your Honor," Diana Vega said, not sounding apologetic at all. She produced a silk handkerchief and dropped it on Rebecca's lap. "That was unprofessional of me. Let me explain. I'm also Mr. Morrison's half-sister, Uncle Elijah's daughter from his first marriage. I've been aware of my half-brother's situation for some time, and I've watched this woman psychologically abuse him for years while planning to take whatever crumbs she could extract from the divorce." She pulled a document from her briefcase and placed it on the table in front of Rebecca. "This is a cease and desist notice," Diana explained. "You are prohibited from contacting Daniel Morrison by any means. You are prohibited from discussing him, his inheritance, or your marriage in any public forum. You are prohibited from attempting to sell your story to media outlets. Violation of any of these terms will result in immediate legal action." "You can't," Rebecca started. "I can," Diana interrupted, "because attached to that cease and desist is a detailed breakdown of the financial damage you caused during your marriage. Credit cards you secretly opened in Daniel's name, cash advances you took from his bank account, a car lease you signed using his information. The total comes to $67,000 in debt that Daniel has been quietly paying while you've been living with your investment banker." Victoria Chen, who'd been edging toward the door, froze. "We will be filing criminal charges for identity theft and financial fraud," Diana continued. "The district attorney is reviewing the case now. Given that you committed these crimes while planning to divorce your victim, I'm told they're very interested in prosecution." Rebecca's face went from white to gray. "I didn't. Those were just... We were married." "Fraud is fraud," Diana said. "Marriage doesn't provide immunity. You stole from him, Rebecca. Systematically. For years. And unlike civil court, criminal court doesn't care how pretty you are or how sad your story sounds." She turned to leave, then paused, a mirror of Daniel's own pause minutes earlier. "One more thing," Diana said. "That yoga studio where you teach? The building is owned by Morrison Holdings, a subsidiary of the family trust. You'll be receiving an eviction notice by end of business today. Your membership at Elevation Gym? Also a Morrison property. Canceled. The spa where you get your nails done? We acquired it last year. Your band. The boutique where you bought that dress?" She gestured at Rebecca's designer outfit. "Morrison property as of this morning. They've been instructed not to serve you." Rebecca's mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish drowning in air. "My brother is a kind man," Diana said softly, and for the first time, her voice carried genuine emotion. "Too kind. He would never do what I'm doing now. But I'm not kind, Mrs. Morrison. I'm a corporate lawyer who specializes in destroying people who damage my family. And you damaged my family." She walked to the door, her expensive heels clicking against the courtroom floor. Her assistants followed, their briefcases full of documents that would dismantle Rebecca's life with surgical precision. "Oh," Diana added from the doorway, "Brandon Hutchison, the investment banker? He's being fired from Thornton Financial this afternoon. They're a client of ours. We made some calls. apparently using company resources to facilitate an affair. Dinner reservations, car services, that European vacation booked through the corporate travel account constitutes misuse of firm assets. He'll be lucky if they don't pursue charges. The door closed behind her with a whisper of expensive hinges. Judge Hendricks slowly sat back down, removing her glasses to rub her eyes. In 20 years on the bench, she'd never seen anything like this. Part of her wanted to reprimand Diana Vega for the spitting incident. Another part of her, the part that was a woman, a human being who'd witnessed countless divorces motivated by greed and cruelty, couldn't quite bring herself to care. "This divorce is granted," she said quietly. "You're dismissed, Mrs. Morrison. Or should I say, Ms. Thompson." She checked the paperwork. "You'll be reverting to your maiden name as requested. Congratulations. You're free." Rebecca sat alone in the courtroom long after everyone else had left. The court reporter packed up her equipment. The bailiff checked his watch. The overhead lights continued their persistent humming. Finally, slowly, Rebecca stood. Her legs felt weak, her designer dress suddenly uncomfortable, her future a vast emptiness she couldn't begin to comprehend. She'd walked into this courtroom expecting victory and walked out with less than nothing, less than she'd started with, because now she understood exactly what she'd thrown away. Not the $90 billion, not the empire, not the wealth. She'd thrown away a man who'd loved her when he had every reason not to. A man who'd worked himself to exhaustion trying to provide for her. A man who'd absorbed her criticisms and her cruelty and her betrayal with quiet dignity. And in her greed to claim her share of his nothing, she'd forced him to reveal that his nothing was actually everything. The irony crushed her more completely than any legal consequence could. Outside the courthouse, Daniel Morrison stood in the afternoon sun, his cheap suit catching light, his posture straighter than it had been in years. A town car idled at the curb, not ostentatious, just clean and professional. Diana Vega stood beside it, her expression softening as she looked at her half-brother. "You didn't have to do that," Daniel said. "The spitting, the threats, that wasn't—" "Someone had to," Diana interrupted. "You're too good, Danny. Uncle Elijah knew that. It's why he left everything to you instead of me. He said you'd do something meaningful with it, something that mattered." Daniel smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. "He was wrong about that. I'm splitting it with you. 50-50. I've already had the lawyers draw up the papers." Diana's eyes went wide. "Danny, that's 45 billion. 45 billion, 100 million, $236,000, Daniel corrected. "Give or take what the market does today. You're Uncle Elijah's daughter, Diana. You deserve it. And more importantly, I need a partner who knows what she's doing. I've been working at a warehouse for 8 years. I don't know the first thing about running an empire." Diana laughed, a sound of pure surprised joy, and hugged her brother tightly. "You're going to change the world, you know that?" "Maybe," Daniel said. "But first I'm going to sleep for about 3 days. And then I'm going to figure out how to help people who've been where I've been. Powerless, overlooked, underestimated. Because Uncle Elijah was right. People reveal themselves when they think you're powerless. And the world needs more protection for the powerless." The town car pulled away from the courthouse, carrying the poor husband who'd become a billionaire, and the half-sister he'd just made a billionaire, toward a future neither of them had imagined, but both of them would build together. Inside the courthouse, Rebecca finally stood and walked toward the exit. Her phone buzzed, text messages flooding in as news of the divorce spread through her social circle. Her mother, her friends, everyone asking the same questions, expressing the same shock. She didn't answer any of them. At the bottom of her purse, beneath her wallet and her makeup and her keys, her fingers found the cheap bracelet Daniel had given her on their 5th anniversary, the one she'd mocked, the one she'd shoved into her purse and forgotten about. She pulled it out now, examining it in the harsh courthouse lights. The inscription inside was almost worn away from age, but she could still make out the words, "To Rebecca, richer in love than gold." She'd laughed at that inscription, called it corny, told her friends it was embarrassing how sentimental Daniel was, how out of touch with reality. Now standing alone in the courthouse lobby with her entire life crumbling around her, Rebecca finally understood what Daniel had been trying to tell her all along. She'd always been looking for gold. He'd been offering her something infinitely more valuable, and she'd thrown it away without ever understanding its worth. The bracelet slipped from her fingers and clattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing through the empty lobby like the closing of a door that would never open again. Outside in the afternoon sun, Daniel Morrison closed his eyes and felt the weight of 7 years lift from his shoulders. The hurt would remain. Betrayal didn't heal overnight. But beneath the hurt was something new, something he hadn't felt in so long he'd forgotten its name. Freedom. Not the freedom that money bought, though that was real and would take getting used to, but the freedom that came from knowing, finally and completely, that he'd valued himself enough to walk away from someone who didn't. His phone buzzed. A text from Diana. First board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Don't be late, billionaire boy. Daniel smiled and typed back. Yes, ma'am. He had $45 billion, an empire to learn, a world to change, and a sister who just spit in his ex-wife's face. Life, he thought, was about to get very interesting. Behind him, unnoticed in the shadow of the courthouse, a photographer from a local news outlet lowered her camera. She'd captured the moment Daniel smiled in the sunlight, the moment Rebecca found the bracelet, the moment everything changed. By morning, the story would be everywhere. Poor warehouse worker inherits $90 billion. During divorce, ex-wife gets nothing. But the story would miss what mattered. It would miss that Daniel had known for 3 days and said nothing. It would miss that he'd prepared for this 8 months in advance. It would miss that his real revenge wasn't financial but existential, forcing Rebecca to confront exactly who she was and what she'd chosen. Most importantly, it would miss the lesson Uncle Elijah had spent a lifetime learning and a single letter teaching. The only wealth that matters is the wealth of character. Everything else is just numbers in an account, waiting to reveal who you've always been. And in the end, both Daniel and Rebecca had been revealed completely. He'd been revealed as someone who could endure the worst and remain decent. She'd been revealed as someone who'd throw away everything for the illusion of something more. The judge had read his net worth, but the universe had read their souls, and only one of them had passed.